Picture this. The year is 67 AD. The summer heat of Rome shimmers in the air, distorting the marble columns and statues of the Forum. The chatter of merchants, the creak of ox-drawn carts, and the echo of sandals striking stone blend into a living hum, the pulse of the empire's heart. And then the hum falters. People turn their heads, conversations falter mid-sentence, and a narrow path opens in the crowd as the emperor himself appears. Nero strides forward, clad in tunic and cloak dyed the deep imperial purple no commoner may wear, a wreath of gold resting lightly in his curled hair. At his side glides a woman, young, arrestingly beautiful, draped in silks that shimmer like liquid light. Gemstones catch the sun in a dazzling display, and her eyes seem to belong to another world entirely. But the admiration in the Forum is poisoned with unease. The whispers begin, hushed yet insistent, like the rustle of dry leaves before a storm. For everyone knows the truth, or at least the truth as it has passed from mouth to ear in smoky taverns and shadowed porticos. That woman, the one strolling beside the most powerful man in the known world, was once a boy. His name had been Sporus, and what Nero did to him is a wound in the memory of Rome. A story so grotesque that even centuries later, it remains a cautionary whisper about the depths to which power can descend. If you could hear the mutterings that followed them through the Forum, you might think them ghost stories. And in a way, they are. This is not merely another tale of imperial excess, nor is it simply a Roman scandal inflated by time. It is a story in which grief is alchemized into obsession, love becomes a weapon, and one human being is transformed into the living effigy of another, shaped, altered, and displayed like a jewel in a crown of madness. The name Sporus may not have crossed your ears before now. Few schoolroom histories bother to dwell on him. But by the time his life was over, his existence had been consumed entirely by a dead woman's shadow. He was not a political rival, nor a rebel, nor even an ambitious courtier. He was simply chosen because of his face, because it echoed someone Nero could not bear to lose. And for that resemblance, he would be stripped of everything else. But to understand Sporus's fate, we must first step backward, to the years when Nero's mind had not yet been fully claimed by the corrosive effects of absolute power. It is tempting to imagine him as a villain from the very start, but history is rarely that simple. When he took the throne at just 16 years old, many Romans saw in him the dawn of something golden. There is a cruel irony in beginnings. Sometimes they appear so bright that we mistake them for destiny. And in the early days of Nero's reign, the people of Rome could almost believe they had found a ruler touched by the gods. He reduced taxes, commissioned new buildings and theaters, and even performed music and poetry for the public. This was a novelty, an emperor who wanted to entertain, who wished to be loved not through fear, but through shared delight. But a crown in Rome is a gilded cage. Within its bars lies a solitude so profound, it distorts the mind. Nero's life would become a careful dance between indulgence and paranoia, pleasure and suspicion. By the time Sporus would cross his path, that dance had turned into a spiral, one that began with a woman named Poppæa Sabina. She was the kind of beauty that poets ruin themselves trying to describe. Golden hair, eyes like green glass, and a carriage so regal that even the matrons of the patrician class lowered their gaze. But it was not only her appearance that made her dangerous. She was intelligent, quick-tongued, and knew the treacherous geography of Roman politics better than many senators. Poppæa would be the catalyst. And through her, the seeds of the tragedy that would claim Sporus began to grow. When Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus first stepped onto the imperial throne in 54 AD, he was still more boy than man, just 16, barely old enough to command his own household, let alone an empire stretching from the windswept shores of Britannia to the sands of Egypt. Yet the Senate and people of Rome, weary of political intrigue and hungry for stability, looked upon him with something almost like hope. His accession had been engineered by his ambitious mother, Agrippina the Younger, who positioned him as the natural heir after the death of Emperor Claudius. Whether that death was the work of illness or poison, Rome could only whisper. The young Nero inherited not just the purple robes and laurel crown, but also a carefully cultivated image, a prince who could be the bridge between the stern dignity of the old republic and the pleasures of a new cosmopolitan empire. At first, he lived up to that promise. Taxes were reduced, debts forgiven, and games staged to delight the common people. He championed the arts, funding theaters and sponsoring poets. In a break from tradition, he even took the stage himself, singing and performing in front of an audience, an act that scandalized the aristocracy but endeared him to the masses. This was not the dour, distant ruler of old. This was an emperor who smiled, who could laugh, who seemed to belong to his people. Ancient historians like Suetonius record those first years almost wistfully, as if they, too, could not help but mourn the boy who once might have been great. Yet even in these golden days, there were shadows forming at the edges of Nero's court. The machinery of imperial power is a relentless grindstone, and anyone who wears the crown finds themselves ground down in turn. There is a peculiar loneliness to absolute authority. For every voice offering counsel, there are a dozen others offering flattery. And in Rome, flattery is a venom that tastes sweet at first. To be emperor was to be adored and envied in the same breath. To know that those who applauded you in public might plot against you in private. Over time, that awareness does something to a man. For Nero, the isolation was sharpened by youth. Friends were scarce, equals non-existent. Even family was not immune to his suspicion. His own mother, once his fiercest supporter, would eventually fall to his paranoia and be executed on his orders. The boy who had once walked the streets in triumph began to withdraw, turning inward toward a world of art, spectacle, and indulgence. A world where he could control every note, every gesture, every face that surrounded him. It was in this fragile balance between promise and corruption that Poppæa Sabina appeared, a woman whose beauty and ambition would draw him further into the labyrinth of his own desires. She was unlike anyone else in the court, poised yet daring, with a mind as quick as her smile. Poppæa was not content to be a silent ornament at the emperor's side. She intended to shape his reign, and perhaps even his soul. But ambition and love in the imperial court were never clean things. In Rome, affection could be currency, desire a weapon, and marriage the sharpest blade of all. For Nero, meeting Poppæa was not the beginning of a simple romance. It was the ignition of a fire that would burn through the fragile boundaries, still holding his darker impulses in check. And once those boundaries were gone, no one, friend, foe, or innocent, would be safe. Poppæa Sabina entered Nero's life like a carefully choreographed performance. Every glance, every word, every calculated moment of presence engineered to capture attention. Born into an influential family, she had inherited more than beauty. Her father had served as a quaestor, and her stepfather was a Roman consul, giving her both political connections and an upbringing steeped in the language of power. She knew how to navigate the delicate dance of influence in a city where a misplaced word could mean exile, or worse. When Nero first saw her, He was already married to Claudia Octavia, the daughter of the previous emperor Claudius. Octavia was dignified, dutiful, and almost painfully reserved, the perfect image of a traditional Roman matron. But theirs was a political marriage, a union born of dynastic necessity rather than passion. Octavia avoided attention, shunned public spectacle, and rarely challenged her husband's will. Poppæa was the antithesis. She entered a room as though it were her stage, commanding the eyes of senators and soldiers alike. Her voice carried with it a musical lilt, and her laughter, when she chose to give it, was just loud enough to suggest both pleasure and danger. She reveled in being the center of attention, wearing silks from the east that shimmered like water under sunlight, and jewels from the furthest reaches of the empire. It began as a scandal in whispers, the emperor and the married woman. Poppæa was wed to Marcus Salvius Otho, one of Nero's close friends, and a man whose charm rivaled his own vanity. Their marriage, however, was less a union of hearts than a pairing of ambitions. Two climbers bound together until one found a higher rung. That higher rung came in the form of Nero himself. At first, their relationship might have seemed like the countless affairs that embroidered Roman high society. But Poppæa understood the value of rarity. She did not throw herself at Nero. She approached him in a way that forced him to pursue her. She flattered without obsequiousness, challenged without outright defiance, and, perhaps most intoxicatingly, hinted at a shared vision of imperial grandeur that matched his own. It was intoxicating. Where Octavia gave Nero stability, Poppæa offered fire. She could be tender and alluring one moment, sharp-tongued and cunning the next. Ancient sources like Tacitus and Cassius Dio suggest she understood how to feed Nero's ego while also making him believe he was chasing her. Every step of their affair was a calculated move in a dangerous game, a game she seemed confident she could win. But Poppæa was not simply playing for personal pleasure. She maneuvered to secure her position, pushing Nero to divorce Octavia and threatening to leave him if he did not. Whether this was a genuine ultimatum or a masterstroke of manipulation, it had its intended effect. Nero, blinded by desire and impatient with obstacles, began to see Octavia not as a dutiful wife, but as a barrier to his happiness. In the tightly coiled world of the imperial court, Poppæa's presence sent ripples through every political faction. Supporters of Octavia whispered of her virtue and dignity, while Poppæa's admirers praised her beauty and charm. Senators weighed which woman's influence might better serve their ambitions. The palace became a stage for a subtle but relentless contest, one that would soon tip into dangerous territory. For Nero, it was already too late. He was no longer merely attracted to Poppæa, he was consumed. And when an emperor becomes consumed, the machinery of the state itself bends to his obsession. For Nero,